Freakonomics is an unconventional look at economics and human behavior. Economist Steven Levitt and journalist Steven Dubner explore unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, from crime and school test scores to children's names and the drug trade. The book teaches you to look at the world through the lens of incentives and data, showing that logical, though often non-obvious, reasons lie behind all actions. The idea for the book came about after an interview in which Dubner wrote an article about Levitt as a rogue economist. The article became so popular that they decided to join forces. After its release in 2005, Freakonomics instantly became a global bestseller, spawned podcasts, sequels, and a whole genre, pop economics, where complex theories are explained simply and with humor. Introduction: the hidden side of everything. The world is more complex than it seems. Behind almost every event, decision, or habit are hidden causes that are not on the surface. If you learn to see them, you can understand why people behave the way they do and even predict what will happen next. To do this, you just need to change the way you think. Stop looking at the obvious and start asking uncomfortable questions. All human behavior can be explained through incentives. People act not simply because it's the right thing to do or it's the custom, but because it offers them a benefit, saves them from punishment, or increases their comfort. All of economics is built on these incentives: financial, moral, and social. Change the incentive, and people's behavior changes instantly. Sometimes even a small alteration of the rules can completely overturn a system. For example, when a fine was introduced in Israeli kindergartens for parents who were late, it was expected that this would reduce the number of late arrivals. But the opposite happened. They increased. Before the fine, parents felt a moral guilt toward the teachers, but after the fine, that guilt disappeared. Being late simply became a paid service, and people easily bought themselves an extra 10 minutes. This case shows that incentives do not always work as we expect, and that one must consider not only money, but also moral consequences. To understand the world more accurately, you need to abandon your belief in conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom often serves convenience, not truth. When most people repeat something without checking, it becomes a kind of collective legend. For example, for a long time, it was believed that the rise in crime was solely linked to poverty and unemployment. This theory seemed logical until statistics showed that crime was falling even during periods of economic crisis. This meant the connection was illusory and the real reason lay elsewhere. To get to the real causes, it's important to be able to ask the right questions and work with numbers, not assumptions. In this sense, economics is not just about money, but about measurement. Any phenomenon can be viewed as a system of incentives, consequences, and probabilities. When a question is posed precisely, even the most unexpected facts coalesce into a logical picture. For example, why did the crime rate in the US sharply decrease in the 1,990 seconds? For a long time, everyone explained it by the increased number of police and new patrol methods. But statistical analysis showed something different. Crime began to drop precisely where abortion had been legalized 20 years earlier. This discovery has no moral coloring. It is simply an observation of reality. If women in high-risk groups have the option not to give birth to unwanted children, then 20 years later, there are fewer potential criminals. This is how the hidden side of cause and effect relationships, which no one considers, manifests itself. It is important to understand that experts often distort information for their own benefit. When one side has knowledge that the other does not, information asymmetry arises. A doctor might prescribe unnecessary treatment. A real estate agent might suggest selling an apartment for less for a quick commission. And an analyst might embellish data for the sake of reputation. To avoid falling into such a trap, you need to learn to look at facts, not the status of the speaker. The main rule to follow is, don't trust the obvious. Check the data, look for hidden incentives, and ask the questions that are not usually asked. Why do teachers cheat on exams? Why do drug dealers live with their moms? Why do rich white people choose rare names for their children, while poor black people choose ornate ones? At first glance, these questions seem strange, but they are exactly what helps to see how economics permeates every aspect of human life. The book's goal is to teach you to think like a rogue economist, break life down into cause and effect relationships, not be afraid of paradoxes, and look where others don't. When you start analyzing incentives, checking data, and discarding cliches, the world turns out to be clearer and more logical. And then you see that economics is not about money, but about people and their hidden motives. Rule 1. What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? The underlying idea is that incentives, rewards, and punishments drive people's behavior often more powerfully than we think. Incentives are of 3 types: economic money, fines, social public recognition or condemnation, and moral sense of duty, shame. An incentive introduced in one kindergarten program in the form of a fine for late parents did not lead to parents arriving on time, but to an increase in late arrivals. The reason? The introduction of the fine removed the moral incentive, I must not be late, and replaced it with an economic one, I pay the fine. And as a result, behavior worsened. For example, the study at the kindergarten showed an increase in late arrivals after the fine was introduced. Teachers in the Chicago public school system faced high stakes. Their future salaries and positions depended on student test scores. In several classes, a sharp jump in scores followed by a drop was detected, and cheating was identified through an analysis of answers and patterns. For example, erasing incorrect answers and substituting correct ones. In the world of Japanese sumo tournaments, wrestlers with a 7-7 record, 7 wins, 7 losses. In the final match, defeated wrestlers with an 8-6 record, approximately 80% of the time. Whereas in a rematch, the same statistic dropped to about 40%. This suggests potential fixed rigging or unfair deals. The conclusion: to understand how people behave, teachers, athletes, parents, look for incentives who gains what and who loses what. The power of moral and social incentives is underestimated, and their violation can lead to unexpected results. Rule 2. How is the Ku Klux Klan like a real estate agent? The main point is that information asymmetry gives those who know more a significant advantage. The Ku Klux Klan based its influence not only on fear and violence, but on secrecy. Passwords, rituals, and clandestine ceremonies created a sense of elitism and intimidation. When researcher Stetson Kennedy exposed these secrets by spreading them through the popular radio show The Adventures of Superman, the Klan's power waned. Real estate agents, a seemingly peaceful profession, yet a similar mechanism. They know the market and properties far better than ordinary sellers or buyers, and can use their knowledge for their own benefit. It was found that many agents sold their own homes for more money and over a longer period than their clients' homes, precisely because their incentive, a larger commission, was weaker compared to the client's incentive, to sell quickly for the maximum price. For example, one agent convinced a buyer to raise their bid, claiming that the market will skyrocket, and the seller lost a significant amount, while the agent earned only a small commission but rushed the deal. Away from real estate and the KKK in online dating services, people claimed that race was not important, but they still wrote the majority of their messages to members of their own race, which shows that people control what they say, but not necessarily what they do. The internet and open information are gradually breaking down knowledge monopolies. Buyers can search for prices, read reviews, and compare on their own, which reduces the informational advantage of experts. The conclusion: if you are a client or market participant, strive to reduce your ignorance and increase your awareness. If you are an expert, be mindful of how your incentives may diverge from the interests of those you serve. Rule 3. Why do drug dealers still live with their moms? This chapter questions the conventional wisdom, the public's wise opinion, that all street drug dealers are rich. Sociologist Sudhir Venkatesh's study, who infiltrated the Black Gangster Disciples gang structure in Chicago in 1989, showed something different. The gang structure resembles a corporation. The top hierarchy gets the lion's share of the profit, while the lower-level foot soldiers have minimal incomes and high risk. For example, the chapter leader JT earned about $100,000 a year, his officers about $700 a month, and the street sellers less than $4 an hour. A pawn's chance of being killed over 4 years was 1 in 4. The essence, the massive influx of people into the lower ranks, the entry-level position, means that income is low, risk is high, and advancement is unlikely. So why do they stay? Because the incentive, the chance to get to the top, is in play. But when people realize that there will be no advancement, they leave. Also a key point. The emergence of crack, a cheap form of cocaine, made the business massive, increased competition, expanded the market, but at the same time amplified social problems, massive crime, prison burden, and community breakdown. It is discussed that the rise of crime in the US in the 1,990 seconds was linked not so much to increased policing as indirectly to earlier social changes, including the legalization of abortion. But this leads to the next chapter. The conclusion. It is important not to take for granted that all dealers are rich, or that drug dealing is the path to easy money. You need to look at the internal structure, incentives, and the distribution of risk and reward. Rule 4. Where have all the criminals gone? In the 1,990 seconds, America faced a mysterious phenomenon, the crime rate, which had been rising for decades, suddenly and sharply dropped. Newspapers and politicians eagerly explained this with smart reforms, new police methods, and economic recovery. But behind the dramatic headlines was a far more unexpected cause. Most popular explanations did not stand up to factual scrutiny. Economic growth had little effect on the number of murders and robberies, as crimes are committed not for a salary, but due to impulses, environment, and despair. The increase in the number of police only accounted for about 10% of the decrease. The increase in the number of incarcerated people also played a role, but no more than a third of the total difference. Even the famous hotspot patrolling, associated with the name of William Bratton in New York, turned out to be a myth. Crime was falling there even before his reforms, and at the same rate in other cities. Gun laws, such as the Brady Act, also proved useless, as the black market easily circumvented all prohibitions. The death penalty, which advocates considered a powerful deterrent, statistically had no noticeable impact. It was applied too infrequently, meaning the fear of it simply did not exist. Even the demographic factor, an aging population, did not explain such a rapid decline. It turned out that all the obvious causes had failed. The solution to the mystery was found where it was least expected. In 1973, the US Supreme Court legalized abortion in the case of Roe v. Wade. 20 years passed, and by the early 1,990 seconds, those aged 18 to 25, the age group that commits most crimes, had fewer people who statistically were most likely to commit crimes. Children of poor, single, very young mothers. The legalization of abortion did not directly eliminate crime. It simply changed the composition of the generation that grew up. For example, states where abortion was legalized earlier, New York, California, were the first to show a drop in crime. And where laws were introduced later, the decline started later and proceeded at the same speed. The numbers coincided too closely to be a coincidence. This conclusion caused a storm of indignation, as it touched upon moral and ethical boundaries. But it contained no call to action, only dry statistics. Sometimes the most dramatic changes occur not because of new laws and reforms, but because of unnoticed shifts in human life made decades ago. The main lesson is simple: do not trust the obvious answers. The world changes not because politicians made the right decision, but because thousands of people once changed their choice. And often, it is these quiet, unnoticed decisions that create a new reality. Rule 5. What makes a perfect parent? There is an almost religious belief that a child's fate depends on how much love, time, and effort parents invest in them. People read parenting books, enroll their children in extracurriculars, ban television, and proudly take them to museums. But when thousands of children's test scores and surveys were compared with social data, it turned out none of this has much effect on a child's success. Everyday parental habits have little impact on children's grades and future achievements. Neither reading at bedtime, nor strictly limiting screen time, nor visits to theaters show a noticeable difference in results. What parents do is not as important as who they are. Factors that do not depend on daily effort turn out to be decisive. The parent's education level, their income, the mother's age at the birth of the first child, the number of books at home, the language spoken in the family, all these factors have a much stronger influence. Not because these factors directly teach the child, but because they create an environment in which their attitude towards the world is formed. For example, if a mother gave birth after 30, it means she likely had time to get an education and accumulate life experience. Such a child grows up in a more stable environment. If there are many books in the house, it doesn't mean they are read, but it is a signal of the family's cultural habits. And if the parents speak English, the child gains access to better sources of knowledge and communication. Interestingly, adopted children on average show lower test scores than their peers, even though they are raised in loving families. The reason is genetics. The biological parents of such children often had a lower IQ, and this factor is inherited. This does not diminish the role of upbringing, but it shows that environment and heredity interact in a more complex way than it seems. When researchers compared the school results of white and black children, it turned out that the gap almost disappeared before school if the family's socioeconomic status was taken into account. But as soon as children enter schools where the quality of education varies widely, the difference returns. What seems like a racial difference is actually a difference in opportunity. The conclusion is clear. Being a perfect parent in actions is futile. What matters is not what parents do every day, but who they are and what atmosphere they create. A child absorbs not instructions, but the parent's entire way of life. Rule 6, Perfect Parenting Part 2. Would Rashonda by any other name smell as sweet? A child's name seems like a symbol of fate. Parents choose it with special reverence, confident that a good name will make the child successful. But a name is not the cause, but the effect. It reflects the family's social status, but does not form it. Unique names like Imani, Deshaun, or Latifa are often found in poor African American families. Such names become a way to express individuality and pride, especially when the mother is young, poor, and raising the child alone. Affluent white families prefer rare and sophisticated names: Clementine, Akiva, Henry. Each name carries not only a sound, but also the cultural context in which the child grows up. The name itself changes nothing. Children with the names Deshaun and Jake, raised in identical families, have the same chances of success. But the typical Deshaun is more often born into a disadvantaged environment, while Jake is born into an affluent one, and this is what determines the difference in their future opportunities. The name becomes not a cause, but a signal of the world the person came from. The popularity of names moves like fashion from the top down. First, a rare name is chosen by educated and wealthy parents. Then it becomes mainstream, loses its prestige, and moves to lower layers. This was the case, for example, with the names Emily and Lauren. They were once given to daughters from good families, but soon they became popular everywhere and ceased to be elite. Then the upper classes choose new, rare names, and the cycle repeats. Parents do not choose a name randomly, it is a reflection of their expectations. They want to show who they see their child becoming, but a name cannot change fate if it is not backed by support, education, and stability. The conclusion is obvious. A name is just a sign, not a tool. It does not determine what a child will become, just as clothes do not determine personality. What matters is not what a child is called, but what stands behind that name. The real influence comes from the environment, culture, and opportunities that parents create. Epilogue, 2 paths to Harvard. Life rarely adheres to patterns and rules. Even the most logical models and precise calculations cannot predict what a person will become or where circumstances will lead them. The book's epilogue illustrates this through the fates of 2 people who symbolize opposite sides of the human experience, yet converge at one point. The first is Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber. He was born into an affluent, educated family, grew up with love and support, was a gifted child, and entered Harvard at 16. Everything in his biography corresponded to the notions of an ideal start: intelligent parents, good schools, brilliant abilities. But he later became a recluse, renounced society, and began a terrorist campaign against technological progress. His path turned into a tragedy, although his starting conditions were the best possible. The second hero is Roland Fryer, an African-American who grew up in poverty and experienced violence, parental absence, and constant danger. His fate could have ended in prison or on the street, but he became a Harvard professor and one of the most famous economists of modern times. His life is the opposite of Kaczynski's story. A lack of support, but immense inner strength. A desire to understand why the world is unfair and how it can be changed. These 2 biographies show that human life is not subject to simple regularities. Neither social background, nor intelligence, nor even parental love guarantees a specific outcome. The world is too complex to be described by a single formula. But this is not a reason to abandon the attempt to understand it. On the contrary, it is an incentive to look for patterns where others see only chaos. The main meaning of the book is to teach you to see the hidden causes of events and not to trust obvious explanations. It is important not to blindly believe in dogmas, but to be able to ask uncomfortable questions and look for answers in data, not in guesses. The fates of Kaczynski and Fryer remind us that the truth often hides beneath the surface, and only the willingness to dig deeper helps to see it. Freakonomics does not promise universal recipes for success or teach you how to live. It offers another tool, the ability to doubt, analyze, and think like a researcher. The one who's able to see the world not through emotions and stereotypes, but through facts and regularities, gains the most powerful weapon, clarity. And it is clarity that allows you not just to understand, but to change the reality around you. This is such a wonderful book. I have compiled a separate list of all the important theses from this book, along with all the techniques and tools, and created a step-by-step action plan that you can immediately implement in your life. You can get all this in my community, Place of Power. There, you will find a detailed text analysis with similar lists for each book being reviewed. The community has already thoroughly analyzed and made available to you hundreds of world bestsellers with a new analysis released every day. Follow the link in the description and use it.